Well, this is my 28th year teaching consecutively. I started at University of Hartford. I had adjunct faculty. My first tenure track job was at Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. And I have a poem that I wrote at the Café du Monde there about New Orleans. I founded and I started several literary magazines there, founded and edited the Xavier Review, which is still being published there. Well, certainly everywhere one lives and writes, you become part of that place. It took a few years, as anywhere, to write about the flora and fauna of Nebraska. But I'm not really too concerned about where I am when I'm writing, as long as I told someone interviewed me back when I first got here. I said I felt like I was in exile here, but I didn't mean political exile. I meant imaginative exile because of the distance and horizon and so forth, space. But going to school in Michigan and Ohio, I was sort of used to the Midwest, but this is the far Midwest. You can start with Baudelaire's prose poems to T.S. Eliot's, Wasteland, and Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. A lot of, it ranges from those to Marquez, South American literature. Many different authors like that. In the poetry, in that collection, Road Tripping, I tell them about second grade, writing a few short stories. One called Halloween. One called The Three Bears, my version, and one called Halloween. It was titled Boo, about Halloween with 27 O's after it. Boo. And then junior high and high school.
So you started writing when you were young?
Oh, very young. 12 years old when I started poetry, writing poetry. Well, just being a poet observer, I write very personal poems about my family and human behavior, if you will. But I also write a lot of political poems, poetry of witness, if you will, about the terror and absurdity in the world. So there's a lot of triggers there, so to speak. That's my creative process. I teach the creative process in my classes, having them find their own way, if you will, toward the first draft. I write in prose first, full length. Legal pads, when I'm using a legal pad, 8x14, and I just fill pages and pages and pages, up to 50 pages at a sitting, and then it cut back, reductive kind of thing. That might become one poem or several. Well, after 30 more odd years of writing, I hope I have my voice emerging at least. But one can't really force those things, I suppose. It comes with writing, rewriting. Well, I think all writers write for to be understood. Not necessarily all of writers are accessible to general audiences, but that's possible, I suppose, on some level with any kind of poem. I think, there's some simplicity is fine, but poetic ambiguity can be a part of something simple as well. The complexities in poetry are self-evident, and we can't really, make light of that fact. But I think even complex issues, people, anyone, mechanics, construction workers, laborers, we need to try to get them back to poetry like in the olden days, whenever those were. 50s, 40s, 30s. Well, again, I think it's there's a lot of beauty in the world, but then, as I mentioned, the other side is terror, absurdity, and nature, human nature. I think those themes make us human, I suppose. Or attempts to be human. Get a job, I think would probably be the first suggestion. Well, no matter what that is. But, food, shelter, and clothing. I think a lot of younger writers and artists believe that you have to subsist on very little, and do strange things to your body, and not that I haven't, but one matures, I suppose. Well, I'll keep writing poems, but I'm planning. I almost went to film school as a little lad, so I've have an interest in putting novels and short stories and even poems to film. I'm not going to read all of this, but I might. This is a lovely room, and thank you for inviting me from Kearney. I'm going to begin with, let me see, a few poems about nature, the pastoral. This is a very, very early poem of mine I wrote in Connecticut. And you'll see some references to birch tree and so forth. It's a love poem, but most love poems deal with disintegration or after effects of love, if you will, as some critics said somewhere. But this poem was originally titled To Spring. That sounded too much like love. And the title has changed at times, and now it's called Winter Kill, which sort of brings it down to other levels, I suppose, and layers. But it's been published as To Spring and To Winter. But I'll give you the Winter Kill version. In winter, there is one road where nothing stops moving, and the silver rings inside ashen trees rotate with each sunset. This is the road you will find me on. I will kiss the wind slowly until at the end of this road it sings. This is the voice you will hear from me. You will know by the steady reach of my arms, I am the vaulted shadow in wait. This is the town you will find me in. Under the shelter of your eyes in winter, I will fall into your arms like ash. This next poem is only called To Spring. This is another, but this is deals with Nebraska. I say North Carolina, I've been so many damn places, I don't know where I am. But it took a few years to write about Nebraska. I've written poems like The Buffalo, Once Removed from the Platte River, The Cranes, Once Removed from the Platte River. I have different titles like that. But this is to Spring. In spring, there's one river where nothing rises to the surface until the evening hailstorm spreads over the ember field. This is night in the lilac wild. You will stand as the water moves, the topsoil and blackened seed, and hear with the tasseled wind a ghost town on a prairie road. You will find a rising river, search for her over the great plains, with its fences and trees uprooted, in spring over the ember field. This is night in the lilac wild. Lovely table. Can I take that back to my office? I write in various forms, as I've told you. And, these next two are what I call medievalist echo verses. Um, and they're, the antecedents are Beowulf to Hart Crane's The Bridge to, before that, shout song, slavery, during slavery times, the call and response kinds of things. And if you see the page here, there you'll have two columns, one text. Here's the call and the echo, if you will, in italics. This was, I sent them out not knowing what editors would think of them, but Prairie Schooner, I think, published this one. It's called The Ghost of the World on the Plains. There was the ghost, a white buffalo, on prairie grass, shot through its eye. There was the eagle feather, an angel wing, hooves and lightning on the plains, whose hands unearthed the charred bones. The eagle feather, the estuary of the heart. On prairie grass, there was a ghost, shot through its eye on the plains. The charred bones in a child's hand. There was the eagle feather on prairie grass, shot through its eye, a white buffalo. There was the angel wing, an eagle feather, the estuary of the heart, hooves and lightning, the ghost of the world on the plain. And I wasn't content with the medievalist echo verse. I started writing them based on films. So I have like Citizen Kane, I have so forth and so on. I have a lot of Ingmar Bergman films as well, using those films and their actual titles as titles of my poems. And this is Under the Volcano, a novel masterpiece by Malcolm Lowry. Under the volcano. They lived under the volcano, the peasant's song. They carried lanterns into the storm cellar. Pulling the cart out of the mud takes a little time. They saw a vision, angel blood. They wash babies, born in a shallow river. They empty the coal bin under winter light. The peasant's song on the ice pond. Under the snow, the creature awakened. They were born on a river. Wade in the water. They gather flowers, elixir and wool. Takes a little time pulling the cart out of the mud. Under winter light, the earth shall smolder. The waterfall, God's lacerated tongue. Under the volcano, snow. I like small, intimate audiences. I can take them out to the bar later, Where was I? Two poems about my daughter. Daughters, rather. Let's see. I have two books of prose poems, and this was probably my first attempt at it. And the arbitrary line endings are rather, they're more contained than they should be, but here's my first one. What are you going to do? As I find it here. And it's a prose poem for Clara Ben Fort, born January 7th, 1985, 3:23 a.m. Winter brings my wife a child, and your birth arrives with the morning tide like wings alive in a jar. The sunflower seeds and thorns bloom in your hands, Claire, and we walk in the mist and draw circles in the sand. I read your palms like a map, and there are small islands and mountain roads rising in your summer eyes. Is my daughter the dancer, actress, artist, gifted in language or song? I search the form and proper length to write one impossible verse to place into your hand. The unspoken metaphor falls like a meteor into the simple throne of time I've built for you. And your birth arrives with the morning tide like wings alive in a jar. And I put my daughters on the back of my books. You know, I didn't want my mug on them. I have Claire. Well, this one was a cover of Shelley, or Claire when she was 5 or 6. It's a cover of the Carnegie Mellon book years ago. And then when my daughter Shelley was born, she said, "Where's my cover?" So I put both of them on the back of this. She's holding a pen in her diapers, Claire, but what are you going to do? And I had written poems, so I had to write a poem for both of them too, so can't cause any fights. So let me find this one. It's here somewhere, yeah. And this is a variant Villanelle. I write in variant forms, as I mentioned before. For 2 daughters. There is no history in their eyes as they tap the lilac drum and birch, roll out the silver necklace into a straight line over the stone and open wound. The light brown yet darker daughter sits on her father's back porch and reads a poem through the brown yet whiter one under his arms. There is no history in their eyes, only the ancestral trick light pulling the cart out of the mud and war with mules, peasants, and slaves. There are 1,000 metaphors, a father's fortune in their eyes. A hollow star, broken wheel, caboose, wild horse, wings over a blue pond. Their father's pen replaces the hollow star with a broken wheel and drops a whistle on the train as the wild horses graze and stare at the wings above the blue pond. There is no history in their eyes, only 2 daughters in the backyard, hidden under the cellar door. This is their evening of metaphor. Let's see what else we got here. Water, that helps. Almost as good as Cabernet. A few poems about my father. This first poem I wrote about my father years ago, and it sort of parallels the new another one I wrote. It has a different form, longer line length, this older version, but similar objects. My father was a combination Paul Bunyan, John Henry, and Muhammad Ali all together in one. There were 7 of us in our family, 3 brothers, 3 sisters, mother, and a little black dog. He worked in a factory from 11 to 7 for 40 years, making ball bearings. He worked as a barber for 40 years, from 9 to 5 for 40 years. And he was a landlord 24 hours a day in the tenement that he worked on and so forth for 40 years. So the poem is simply called The Worker. My father was a barber surgeon for 39 years, from 9 to 5, a factory worker on the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for 38 of those years, and a landlord in our 3-story tenement 24 hours a day. On Saturdays, it seemed as if the entire Negro section of town had grown long hair. The sounds of shears still vibrate my ears. I swept clouds into the wastebasket. The back room contained hard whiskey, bookies, and hidden magazines. When my father came home at 7 a.m. lifting his black aluminum lunchbox, we 7 children met him at the door, knelt and untied his shoes. His tired eyes burned lines into the side of that box. Each of us wanted leftovers. We grew older and took turns. Steel ball bearings turned in his hands, given to us as marbles, and the largest on the block. They made my father a supervisor. His white friends for 30 years now turned from his voice. Years before, the U.S. Army broke his legs in basic training, fused them for life. When dust began to fill my father's bones, I learned how chronic arthritis can lock together any old man. From the back room, I heard my name and a razor being slapped against leather. With magazines thrown into place, I carried out his clean towels. I picked up clouds. Of course, my father wasn't a surgeon, but in medieval times, they bore holes in your head, so a healer. And clouds, of course, in the 60s, the afros and so forth. So forth and so on. So years later, it took on another, it wasn't yet done. And then this poem here, originally titled Scaremonger, but you don't want to call your father a scaremonger. Yeah. But in this poem, I deal with him as the barber, landlord, and the factory worker. And the poem is called We Did Not Fear the Father. We did not fear the father as the barber who stood like a general in a white jacket with a green visor cap. For 6 long days he held a straight razor like a sword under his porcelain chrome chariot, became a down-home chair. The crop-eared son learned to see how the working man's day job after the night shift filled the son's small pockets with licorice, filled the offering plate, and paid for the keeper who clipped our vines under his own pageant. We did not fear the father as landlord in our 3-story tenement who took charge of 4 apartments and the attic dwellers. We searched each corner of the dirt cellar for a fuse box, while he broke out plasterboard upstairs with a sledgehammer. We peeled out paper from wire mesh and read the headline news, a century old, before he lifted us like birds into our bunk beds. We did not fear the father until he entered the tomb of noise for his night job, shaping molten steel into ball bearings as we stared into the barbed grate where he stood before the furnace, sending smoke into the trees. Fear became the 8-hour echo and glow inside his skull, the high-pitched metal scraping our ears as our provider left the factory floor with oil and sawdust inside his mouth and punched out as fermented daylight burned his eyes. We did not fear our father until he stooped in the dark. Let's see what we got here. They said I can read to midnight, so you better get relax. Oh yes, these prose poems here, some of Darville's. Darville is the name of a character in my first and second book. I'm going to do it. I need to kill him off. Third, I may do a trilogy or a tetralogy, 4, but we'll see how it goes. But he's 3 feet tall. He has strange appendages all over his body and a long red tongue that's 6 feet long, like a whip. Be nice to Darwin. He's the other second self, secret sharer, if you will. I can find the poem here, the blues guitar. Let me see. Start with the blues guitar. And I change the settings here depending where I'm reading, so you'll hear something here. The blues guitar. One can learn about the blues living in Lincoln during a killer frost and by picking from the stem of winter collards, and the phantom notes of the blues can be taught by listening to the chorus under the bare feet at dawn under the pine and snow by the meeting of stone and water and the splitting seed. The windows are breaking in the storm cellar. There's a clock radio with large brown dials on the screen porch. The blanched hooves of the farm animals thunder in their floating stall. One can sing about digging up mud and potatoes for 2 world wars and countless half-world wars. How does one keep time to music planted with a hoe and groomed by a tiller, which turns out a tune accompanied by a single inhuman voice and then thrives like a congregation walking into the baptismal waters? One uneven step into the winter garden and nothing in the soil can be saved. The moaning chords of the blues echo behind each ball and chain, and one hides where one can sleep. I play around with a lot of genres, and this particular poem is called The Autobiography of 9 Genres. I had to deal with them all in one poem. You'll find my poems personal, political, and what is called poetry of witness. But I was in new formulas. I was doing all these damn things before they, invented them, literally. Autobiography of 9 Genres. This is a Petrarchan sonnet for the end of the world. It begins with the death of a prose poem about the Polish blacks and Puerto Ricans at the beggar's wedding to a ballroom dancer in New Britain, Connecticut. There is a Villanelle sitting beside 2 swollen faces of children asleep in the smoke and grease of the barroom kitchen. This is the verse epistle written to our next door neighbor, a naked dancing Russian bear who lives alone in his 3rd floor flat and appears at each family barbecue on his porch with his genitals cut out 29 years before by a boy soldier wearing gloves in one final act of war. There's a Georgic didactic descriptive verse inside the washing machine knocking against the oak tree, and it shows how its belly cut off 3 of Aunt Callie's fingers and a thumb. This is the triple sestina found scattered at the factory gate, with my father's hands stirring the white fires, his fountain of beauty rocking inside a metal drum. There's a haiku behind a locked door at the end of summer. This is becoming a novel prospectus about 2 fishing villages, one in North Carolina, the other in El Salvador. And both have only one street light flashing yellow, yellow, yellow. There's the envoy in the last line behind the tree, and a man holding up one ear of a dog and the scalp of a peasant. Two more Darvilles. I have to read him or he gets mad. But he's a nice guy. Never assume the speaker in the poem is the author, of course. At least that's what they taught us. We lie, too. This is Dog Tag Rag. This journey from Asia to the Middle East to Central America begins at 3 a.m. inside a concrete shelter beneath a ghetto in Detroit, and we lift our parachutes and sit still and wait for the red light. We leave the Concorde and land on our feet near a battery of beardless classmates and blue-collar workers in a private duel for pension and prayer. The lottery of ball and chain at 6 a.m. We kneel for hours. We drag our ankles and toes and lift our buttocks to 16 needles. Plasma drains from our noses. The arms grow long and weary. We are the invisible men looking for a 1-year fix. Human vampires who bomb the soft church bell and hospital bed. High noon. Darville listens to the Motown sound and a rotating world grates under his feet. He shines his black boot with liquid morphine. He carries one blind eye of the enemy in a glass jar. He writes a postcard to his grandmother. It bears his signature and serial number. She receives the glass jar and a miniature flag. She dances a dog tag rag and collapses at the kitchen floor. The young soldier's helmet is tossed into a body bag stuffed with congressional stars. Your life and your name are written in a book. This is your life, son. I taught in New Orleans for 3 years. And this is an earlier poem, based jazz poem. And I have another poem it's very prophetic about what happened. I wrote it 25 years ago, but well, you'll hear that. But this is Darville meets James Brown in Harlem and New Orleans. Please, please don't go. Harlem, 1962, Apollo Theater, ain't no potato like blackberry jam. Darville sits 3 rows and 3 hours before showtime. Front stage is elephant ears and alligator eyes. Drift to a black cage and a drummer like a waterfall in the Rocky Mountain Fatback Americana rent party on a 24-hour street corner rock and roll born and stamped grade A by the Bastard Blues. And Subway hummingbirds feed on race records and found sunny side up on a brownstone Victrola 78 thrown to a black bottom mama by a big daddy in a 9-piece suit woven in the Harlem Renaissance fire hydrant hot sauce handout by a social worker in the farmer's market, mango pie in the glove compartment of a 3-story Cadillac, collars in every black-ass pot, a green banana in every 2-door garage, masthead, alley cat, wrecking crew in Grand Central Station, grease on the ankle, shoe shine, Pullman porter on a bagpipe, anchors away on the continent of the 5 and dime, window cleaner on the 59th floor, juke joint catfish band in New Orleans, Try Me, 1982. Mississippi Queen floats on the Red River midnight saxophone like a full moon carousel of bourbon and beer, Baroque, barbecue, goat ribs, alligator pie, Mardi Gras mambo, Mardi Gras mambo, Mardi Gras mambo, streetcar lizard, smokes a Cuban cigar, 5 minutes to showtime, ain't no potato like blackberry jam. So I went to the Cafe Du Monde on the Mississippi River nearly every day, having French beignets and white powder flying in your face and cafe au lait and so forth. In fact, the Kearney Hub just published this poem because it's, again, eerily prophetic. 25 years ago. Something called the city, New Orleans. There are signals among a wreckage of flowers struck clean in the earth's foaming hand. Something called the city, ruled by marching men who sang and danced and built their graves above the ground. There are signals among a wreckage of humans, forced together, naked and unafraid, lost surveyors of night's crescent fall, bound by rope and fire. The streets are rivers. Who will unearth their gems and fat skulls? There are signals without measure, like death uttered 10,000 years. Something called a city, ruled by marching men who sang and danced and built their graves above the ground. There are brief signals, beginning and ending in the form of a child with spiked fists and golden arms who lifts a bird by its bright wing, the ample, numbing proof of power. Something called a city, ruled by marching men who sang and danced and built their graves above the ground. Let's see what else we got here. Just 4 more, if you can stand it. Let's see. Town clock burning. For my first book, I needed a title poem, and as I told you, titles, intimidate me, but I write so many, I need them as triggers and so forth. So I have 358 now ready for my next manuscript. And this took 6 months to capture. The town clock burning. I'm from New England, small town. Every small town has a clock. And all is not well. And this is a variant, everything, if you will. Let me see, where is it here? On page 13, no less. The town clock burning. The clock positions each of us in one square block behind the church. Nothing is counted more, and year after year we march as it tells us to march. This half-sleeping clock falters, its pendulum craves motion and time. As powder and flame shadow each face, we guard what it tells us to guard. Does this half-stepping helmsman know how a holy war begins? What bell-shaped terror, what moan, what hour we stop when it tells us to stop? This is the clock of boundaries marking its descent as its final seconds pass into history, and without pause, we harm what it tells us to harm. Let's see what we got here. These next three are fairly new pieces. My wife passed away 4 years ago, next week. And these three are sort of what we call testimonials, I suppose. And this one is interesting. You know, I had to take my one of two, or both daughters to school back and forth, and she was in the hospital over 100 days, visiting 2 or 3 times a day. And this particular day, you know, turning on NPR and then hearing about 9/11 as I took my daughter to school, and then I went to the hospital. So this has two, you know, those, the personal and the larger world sort of colliding. And this is the title of a title poem of a manuscript that's circulating now, if you will. In a just and miniature world, we watch the flames draw closer, my daughters begging for good sleep in a just and miniature world. Dropping them at the school door, I half listened to news as the first plane hit the first tower 1,000 miles away. I drove to my wife's hospital bed as the second plane hit the second tower, her last will signature and last kiss in a just and miniature world. We watched the flames draw closer, small fires on the Nebraskan horizon, as the brooding TV seemed half alive above a divine pulse of soft tubes pinned to her arms and lost veins. After our close friends had left us, the angel noble over her body left my daughters begging for good sleep in a just and miniature world. And this is one of, I'm working on a book of Villanelles now. And I'm writing 100 of the damn things. So. I have a pretty good start. I'm not worried about finishing. What we cannot know, we have gifts to learn. What we cannot know, we have gifts to learn. From the widower and tainted hour, we have gifts to learn what we cannot know. From the ugly men and laughter of thieves who plunder, raising their long knives in song, what we cannot know, we have gifts to learn. The children stare into the hourglass and angel wings appear at the window. We have gifts to learn what we cannot know. Women who dance without music or men feed their burned children a thimble of grain. What we cannot know, we have gifts to learn. They tie rope to rock and walk to the cliff. We have gifts to learn what we cannot know. The white raven driven into fire as the trees spread their leaves into shadows. What we cannot know, we have gifts to learn. We have gifts to learn what we cannot know. And the last piece I'll read, in memoriam. To Wendy. There you were falling in beauty asleep. Varying Villanelle as well. There you were falling in beauty asleep. They say on that evening the hollow stars were aligned somewhere between Nebraska, the witless seed, and heaven's border. Your wife's deathbed, a wooden cart placed on a carousel of fare thee well. There you were falling in beauty, asleep. The hunger of gravity on this night was a black mask over your princess eyes. The minister of the heart laughed and torched a bluebird nest above your wedding dress, placed on a carousel of fare thee well. The bastard's night bell in velvet carriage that caught fire at hell's reckless border was God's misguided, lacerated hand dragged underwater by a wild horse, a wreckage of ash, urn, and angel wing. There you were falling in beauty asleep, placed on a carousel of fare thee well. Thank you.